are really excited to have Fraser MacLean here with us in this, new digital age. I'm Natalia Potiriakin. Hopefully you've, maybe seen me before at various Nice Moves events, but now I am here in my little box of an impressionist painting. And before we get started, I am sorry to delay the talk by a couple minutes while I give a couple Nice Moves announcements. First of all, we'd like to thank everyone who submitted to Minnesota Electronic Theater 2021. I am a part of the committee, and so I've, gotten to take a bit of a peek at all the awesome work that you guys made this year, and I'm really excited for you all to get to see it live on December 2nd at 6 p.m. and it's going to be live streamed on this exact same YouTube channel that you are on right now. The second piece of news that I have is that we have launched our annual Nice Moves salary survey. This is a really kind of important community tool for people to know how to price themselves and their work. We collect the daily rates of freelancers, of people who work in a studio setting, and we are also collecting a little bit of COVID-related data, and it kind of helps us see where things are moving. And we have heard from people that this survey has helped them ask for more money and to have, information to back it up. So it really helps us if everyone in the community fills it out. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to the survey in the chat. I am aware that, again, that there's a little bit of a delay, so hopefully this isn't just totally out of the blue, but there you go. And then my next announcement is that you still have time to go to anchor.fm/nicemoves and submit a shout out or a community announcement before the next episode of the Nice Moves Spotlight podcast drops at the end of the month. And, you could say happy birthday to your mom, or you can talk about your new short film or whatever you want to do. So go get it in while you still can, because it's going to be the last podcast episode of the season. So. And then finally, stick around to the end of the talk because we're going to do live Q&A and I'll be collecting your questions through the live chat box. And after that, we have set up a virtual mingling space where we all can hang out as 8-bit video game characters and talk to each other. I'll be there. I think Fraser can pop in for a little bit. So it'll just give us a chance to sort of be in the same room again, at least. And I'll be putting the link in the chat at the end of the live stream, so you can look forward to it then. And that's all I have for now, other than to stay safe, to stay warm. Not everyone watching this may be in Minnesota, but the wind and the cold is picking up and the snow is starting to fall, so I'm excited to wear my best coats. And I hope you all have a lovely Thanksgiving break. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to our fantabulous guest speaker. Please give an invisible drum roll for Mr. Fraser MacLean. Woo!
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Nice Moves. Thank you, Mike, Wendy, everybody who's played a part in making it possible for me to join you here this evening. I'm going to dive right in, and before I go into the keynote presentation, please forgive me because this will inevitably lag or drag a little bit. But I want to open by showing you the maroon cartoon from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was perhaps the movie that really changed my life, turned me in the animation direction. So enjoy and pay close attention to the sequence, if it's still moving on your screens, where Roger Rabbit flies off the Sacolux vacuum cleaner and turns into a balloon and flies around in the air. That's an important sequence.
Like my 17th cousin, who is 156 times removed from any side. I'll save you, baby! Okay. Don't burn yourself, baby Herman! I'm here, baby!
Now that I've unmuted myself, so we're going now into, in case that really was very, very laggy and not moving very much at all, you can relax. There are only
It was
three.
totally fine, actually.
Was
I
it
think
okay?
I think once I turned my video off, it helped the stream. So I'm gonna turn it
Who
back
knew?
off again, but it
Okay.
looked okay to me.
Sounds good. Okay, so now we're going into the keynote part of the presentation. So again, thank you to everyone at Nice Moves for the invitation. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I really hope I can get up to Minnesota to meet with everybody in person before too long. So this is kind of a career animation layout mashup sort of thing. And what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of an indication of how I wound up working in animation in the first place. And as I was putting the presentation together, I realized it kind of starts and ends in the same place, really. And it's not exactly the place that you would imagine. In 2011, 10 years ago, a book was published called Setting the Scene, The Art and Evolution of Animation Layout. And one of the weirdest things about the book is that I wrote it because I'm not a layout artist, as you will see. I was trained in all kinds of different things, but never trained in layout, and have only occasionally actually done any layout artwork. But it was so exciting and such a privilege to get the opportunity to go into so many of the archives and to see original Warner Brothers, Looney Tunes and Merry Melody background paintings, original Tex Avery drawings, original Tom and Jerry artwork, just mind-blowing. And this is the cover sheet for the level 6 scenic layout for a part of Pinocchio that we're also going to look at, which I hope won't lag too badly either. So this is a real kind of, this is like Dead Sea Scrolls. I get so excited by paperwork like this as well as by the artwork. I'm probably the only person who ever went into the Animation Research Library at Disney and actually asked to see exposure sheets. That's how old and sad I am. But anyway, so I would love to dedicate this to the memory of a truly wonderful artist and human being, Roy Nesbitt, who sadly passed away just a week shy of his 91st birthday in April of this year. But he was the layout artist for what you've just been watching, the Maroon cartoon at the beginning of Roger Rabbit. He also worked on Space Jam, as did I. Thief and the Cobbler, in this photograph, he's holding one of the Errol LeCaine paintings from Roy's layout for the war machine sequence in Thief and the Cobbler. Roy was just such a magnificent and inspiring person, and he travelled around with me to lots of different cities in the UK and Europe to promote the book, and I had the chance to get to know him, and it was a great honour, and he was a really wonderful artist. So, Right. Well, what are we looking at this painting for? I grew up in Edinburgh, in Scotland, and this is the National Gallery of Scotland, which is in the city centre at the bottom of a strange S-shaped street called the Mound. And I was really lucky. My mother and father, my father was a journalist, my mother was a teacher and a writer, and they were really encouraging. There were a lot of kids my age who were interested in visual art and who were prepared to put the work into the drawing, the painting, the ceramics, whatever. But in the 1960s and the 1970s, there were very few places encouraging young children who had a flair for the visual arts. I was lucky, not because I was any more capable than any of the other kids my age, but because I was one of the very, very small number of kids whose parents actively encouraged me to go to art galleries. The Edinburgh Festival happens at the end of August, the beginning of September every year. My dad was a journalist, so he got free tickets to stuff. So I grew up seeing ballet, Shakespeare, experimental theatre, opera, going to amazing shows and exhibitions, the Bunraku Japanese puppet theatre, and I didn't pay for any of it. So I'm a lucky, lucky guy. And when I was younger, when I was a lot younger, this was my favourite painting. And I would spend a lot of time in front of it. But like a lot of young people, like a lot of teenagers, I was really interested in the images. I didn't really pay too much attention early on to the little card next to the painting that told you all the relevant information. And when I was 14 years old, I was standing again in front of this painting by Diego Velázquez, The Old Woman Cooking Eggs. And I read to the side of the painting, and I discovered Velázquez was only 19 when he painted it. I did the arithmetic. He was born in 1599. This was painted in 1618. And this little light went on above my head, and I thought, if you really want to get your act together, you have 5 years left to get this good. And that was kind of what was driving me. And that was what stayed inside my head and my heart. The idea that, if I was going to learn how to be an artist, it was going to be in that kind of context. It would be in a frame, on a wall, in a gallery. But I did love animation when I was growing up. And I loved Disney animation more than anything. I mean, we had Hanna-Barbera, we had Top Cat, we had the Flintstones, we had a double bill on Tuesday nights of Tom and Jerry. And even as a kid, I could tell the qualitative difference. And I knew enough about certain aspects of painting and design that I could work out some of what made the difference between the Flintstones and Tom and Jerry. But when you saw Disney animation, and you had to go to the cinema if you wanted to see it in colour. We didn't have a colour television in our house till I was 14 years old. So going to see movies like Fantasia and Jungle Book in the cinema in Edinburgh when I was a kid, I cannot tell you just how much of an impact that had. It was staggering. But there were no animators in Scotland in the 1960s and the 1970s. There just were not. There were a couple of people by the time I was a student in the 1980s, but they weren't producing an enormous amount of work that I thought was really top level, like Disney. But we had a lot of painters and illustrators, and again, you aspire to be what you can see in the neighbourhood, near to you. And this is a really important aspirational glitch. We ought no longer to be in a situation where we don't aspire to be what we're capable of simply because we don't have it immediately around us, particularly with the internet and so many other forms of connection. But at the time that I went to art school, when I was 18 years old in 1979, my plan when I became an art student was to become the best painter or illustrator that I could be. And we were really lucky. It was a 4-year course. The first year you just got to do everything. You got to draw, paint, do ceramics, sculpture, printmaking, all kinds of stuff. But almost all of the painters and illustrators that I actually met face to face seemed to be burned out, self-obsessed, cynical alcoholics. No offence intended to, don't Google anybody from my generation of Scottish painters and illustrators and assume that that's true of every individual, but it was a majority for sure. And that didn't seem to me like an aspirational goal. I wasn't really terribly keen on becoming an alcoholic or cynical or self-obsessed. I mean, we're all self-obsessed, but, you know, there's a limit. But I loved drawing and I loved painting and I loved the idea of trying to be Diego Velázquez. And something told me that learning to draw and paint in the traditional or classical style was not only going to come in handy somewhere along the line, I felt intuitively that it was the right thing to do, the visual art equivalent of a dancer stretching, an athlete building up muscles, or a musician practicing scales. And I drew and drew and drew. And then in our second year, we had to decide which department to go into and study a specific area. And I chose the Department of Graphic Design. And a lot of people my age did this because in most art schools, it was the only department that had anything to do with contemporary culture or popular culture. And I discovered when I went into the Department of Graphic Design, they really didn't like my drawing. I mean, I can't begin to describe to you how much they did not like my drawing. So I received an enormous amount of negative feedback. My tutors in graphic design were so unanimously hostile to my Renaissance aspirations, and they continued to pour scorn on my artwork. Plus, I was increasingly fascinated by cinema, visual effects, and in particular, by the new medium of music video. So I was an art student in the weird grey area between Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody video and MTV. So the whole process of promoting your work as a popular musician or a rock band or whatever was becoming much more visualized because of music video. So when the Glasgow School of Art invested in some portable video equipment, and this is portable by 1982 standards, so this is like a giant concrete block of a camera with all this coaxial cables attaching it to even heavier batteries. That kind of portable. Not this kind of portable, that kind of portable. So nobody else seemed to be interested in this equipment. And I realized this was my chance to find out how to work with moving images. So I kind of hijacked the equipment, and my tutors just allowed me to go off and invent a little course of my own, where instead of designing album sleeves the way that you would for print, I was designing and filming and making little music videos. And this is embedded audio. It's a song by a group of three sisters called the Roaches, and the song is called Pretty and High.
She came on the stage in a dress like the sky.
She had painted a sunset around her eye. I loved this song. I had never heard anything like it. And I decided I was going to make a music video for it. And this is all that's left of it.
How pretty and high and shy she was. Pretty and high and shy.
So I did little storyboards and I dressed my friends up and we did makeup designs based on Japanese kabuki theatre and all that kind of stuff. And how well received was it? Well, film and animation just were not considered art in Scotland in the 1980s. They were considered some kind of aberration. I don't know. People were they just were not interested. So ultimately, having spent 3 years, I didn't stop doing all of the drawings that meant so much to me. I carried on doing them. I just didn't show them to my tutors because the tutors always had this like knee-jerk almost like gag reflex when they saw my artwork. So I started doing this work on video and that was all I showed them. But it turned into this crazy sort of battle with circumstance because there really were no facilities to exhibit work on a screen because it was all for print or it was all on canvas or it was all, you know, printed on paper. So I was actually the first ever Glasgow School of Art student in 1983. This is crazy. To incorporate moving image content and a screen. And behind that, you see these like wooden plywood screens. I had to go into the basement and saw a hole with a jigsaw having measured the size and shape of a great big cathode ray tube television, which is on a big stand behind this with a repeat action U-matic player screening my really awful music videos. But you know, it was kind of, I was doing what I could with the available materials. So I was there from 79 to 83. And one of the people that was a visiting tutor said, if you are serious about this, if you really want to get into the movie industry, there's something called the Scottish Film Training Trust. But the union that was in charge of the entertainment industries was called the ACTT. Scotland had 5 million people in it when I graduated. The union would only allow 3 of us into the industry each year, and they wouldn't allow anyone to train in a creative role. You had 3 options. You either came into the industry training to be a camera operator, to be an editor, or to be a sound recordist. That was it. Those were the options. And I had had so many problems. I'd caused so many problems for the technician in the architecture department. Still don't know why the architecture department was home to the offline edit suite, but they were. And the technician there was so freaked out at my lack of discipline in editorial planning and paperwork. I realized very early on that all the creative fun stuff is here. All the discipline and organizational stuff, it fills up the rest of the picture. So I applied to be taken on as an editing trainee. And from 83 to 84, I trained by working on local news, current affairs, all on 16mm. These pictures were taken when I got the chance to move to London in 1985 to work for a magnificently eccentric, nutsoid film company called Sands Films on an adaptation of a Charles Dickens book that pretty much nobody had ever read called Little Dorrit. There was a BBC adaptation with Andy Serkis more recently, but nobody had ever gone near this for film purposes. And it was going to be 6 hours of cinema screen time in 2 3-hour parts. And I'm like, this is so crazy, I have to work on this thing. So this is me in the cutting room in an old converted warehouse next to the River Thames. And every morning, Alec Guinness, in his costume, with his coffee and a bacon roll, would walk through the cutting room and we'd say good morning to one another. And I just thought, I'm making a movie with Obi-Wan Kenobi. How bad can that be? And I spent 2.5 years learning more than I have time here to describe about the filmmaking process on 35mm, with magnetic tape, with film, with actors and actresses going through the cutting room between the makeup and costume departments and the cars that left for the soundstage. And I thought that was me on my road to being a director. That was my idea. I was going to be a film director. And I'd kind of given up on the idea that I would ever be able to unite my love of image making in the painterly tradition or the illustrative tradition with what it was possible to do in film in the UK at that time. When I finished on Little Dorrit, I couldn't get arrested. I put in applications. I went up to Terry Gilliam's house in Highgate and I put my resume through his door and went, please hire me for Baron Munchausen. I tried to get on to Fish Called Wanda. Nobody wanted me. And I had to go at 6 a.m. every Monday morning into Soho to buy Screen International and see what jobs were available. And one morning, although I couldn't find any editing jobs, there was this picture of Mickey Mouse. And I was reading this, just incredulous. Walt Disney Animation requires exceptionally talented animation personnel to work in London on a major full-length live-action animation feature. Please send it. And I was like, I so have to get onto this film. But of course, I had no animation experience, and I'd spent 3 years being told that my drawing was shit. So I didn't send him any artwork. I wrote a letter and I said, hire me, bring me into the cutting room. And it was one of those tumbleweed moments. Nothing came back. Silence. So I found the phone number, called up, and I was put through to Don Hahn, who basically got my letter out of the trash along with my resume. And he said, yeah, well, we didn't call back because we don't need anybody in the cutting room. But hold on, you spent 4 years at art school in Glasgow. Can you draw? And I said, yeah. And he said, have you got any figure drawings like traditional perspective, still life? And I went, I've got a ton of that. So 2 hours after that phone call, all the artwork that my 1980s Scottish tutors told me was shit got me hired by Disney. Go figure. So anyway, that's how I got hired to work on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Completely on trust, myself and a lot of other people, and this is my first ever contract to work in the animation industry at £186 a week. Holy mother of God, rising to £200 a week if I don't screw up in the first 4 weeks. This is just too good to be true. I did screw up in the first 4 weeks really badly, but they kept me on anyway, so that was kind of them. So what was my contribution to Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Was it layout? No. Was it ink and paint? No. Was it character animation? So this is the first scene I ever worked on in animation. The first day that I was on Roger Rabbit, I didn't design the cow with the lipstick, I didn't animate the cow with the lipstick. I was the trainee special effects in-betweener on the shadows on the cow with the lipstick. Hooray! So that was my stellar first gateway into the animation industry, was drawing shadows on cows, which is kind of weird, but it didn't feel quite so weird because all these other people were also adding shadows to otherwise apparently flat cartoon characters. Why were we doing that? Okay, well, what Don Hahn and Chris Knott, who is the head of the effects department in London, saw in my portfolio was volumetric drawing with accurate interpretation of real life lighting effects on solid figures and objects. And that was what they were doing on Roger Rabbit. Instead of trying to make the real people look flat, they were trying to make the cartoons look three-dimensional. So we even got to meet Steven Spielberg. He just appeared behind us one day and went, "Hi guys, how are you doing?" But of course, you're not interested in Steven Spielberg. You're interested in that guy because he's me when I was 26 years old. And I actually still am wearing the same size of jeans all these years later. I need to eat more. Okay, so Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Steven Spielberg, London. I was 26 when that photograph was taken. I'm 60 now. So a lot of people are not entirely sure quite what it was that made Roger Rabbit such a departure. But if you watch Bedknobs and Broomsticks, or better still if you watch Mary Poppins, what they do is they go to a magical place, or they go to an island, or they go underwater, or any time that the humans have to interact with the cartoons, they're in some parallel universe. And in the case of Mary Poppins, they jump into this chalk painting on the sidewalk, and when they get to the other side, they brush off all the dust, and magically they're wearing brightly coloured costumes and they're very heavily lit. So the whole idea was, don't move the camera around, make the real people look flat, and nobody will notice. And of course, if you do it for a few minutes and then go back to the real world, people are even more astonished. But what happened when Robert Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg came to London and met with Roy Nesbitt and Dick Williams and all these people is Dick Williams said, "Don't you dare. Don't lock off the camera. Don't miss the opportunity to make this a Bob Zemeckis movie. Go where you like, and we will find a way of following all the perspective, changing on every frame, and we will animate the lighting effects, and you won't know the difference." And that sounded great and brave and bold at the time, but that meant an absolute shed load of work, pencil to paper. So we would get line artwork on our desk, and our job was to imagine what a three-dimensional Jessica Rabbit would look like, based on what we knew of the real human form, even though she's very caricatured and exaggerated. So we would add what were called tone mats. And these, once we'd added them, all had to be shaded in so that you could see them on the line test. And we would have rim lights or edge lights that would be the lights that would be catching the side of the figure. And once these had been through the compositing and post-production process, they were assigned different lighting values. And if I have time, I'll show you how we did that. So all the cartoon characters took on the appearance of three-dimensionality, because we were adding effects levels for the lighting, one drawing at a time, one level at a time, 24 frames a second. And then, of course, we had to sit around at the end of it and listen to ILM, taking all the credit for it, so screw ILM. They did not add the shadows. They composited the shadows and the lighting effects, but if you listen to the DVD commentary, they claim that they added them. They didn't. We did, with a pencil. Okay, so the hardest scene that we had to do, myself and Chris, who was the animator that I assisted, was this one where the light is moving all the way through, which was done just to show how fancy schmancy this technique was. So they kept this light swinging over Eddie Valiant and Roger as they try and saw through the cufflinks. And just to animate the lighting effects on this and do the in-betweens was an additional 5 or 6 weeks of work after the character animation was finished. And this is the diagram that I had to create for the assistants and the in-betweeners that were working on it. So how did all of this work? Okay, well, I'm going to come out of screen share Keynote, and I'm going to go into screen share video briefly to show you a TV commercial for breakfast cereal, which we did at a company called Passion Pictures, where they basically hired the effects crew to capture the market in TV commercials that looked like Roger Rabbit. This is even a kind of a version of a scene in Roger Rabbit called the Dum Dum Bullet sequence. This is an advert for Weetabix using this technique.
Let's get them, boys.
Sure, boss.
Weetabix. Now, they've had their Weetabix.
Those dirty rats. I guess I'll give it a miss.
Home time. Say, have you had your Weetabix?
So, in order to make those cartoon characters just the same way that we did in... oh, now I have lost... Okay, I can't... I have to go back into Keynote. Yeah, this is a bit of a weird one. So you have to hold with me just for a second. So I have to press Escape, and then I have to press Screen Share. Are we okay? Natalia, is everything okay?
I'm not seeing a screen share yet. Oh,
Are you
it's
seeing
coming.
one now?
Yes, we're in.
Keynote does this very weird thing where it disappears for momentarily. So on our desks, we would receive Edward G. Robinson. So we've got Peter Lorre, Edward G. Robinson, and Jimmy Cagney in place of the terrible, racist, offensive stereotypes that there were in the original scene in Roger Rabbit with the little Mexican in the sombrero, the little red Indian, the little cowboy, whatever, that Eddie Valiant shoots at his whiskey bottle. So this was done with gangster actors instead. So what we would have to do is say, okay, we look at the live action, and this was all in the form of black and white photographic photostats that were enlarged and peg registered. Nothing in color, nothing in the computer. We would have to, because there weren't any computers, we would have to look on an old cathode ray TV screen at the live action footage and say, there's a bright light behind the cappuccino machine on the left. Which part of this imaginary 3D version of Edward G. Robinson as a bullet would catch that light? Then we would isolate that area frame by frame to say light will hit it on this point. To make it more solid, we would add a tone mat to give it volume in the center. Then there's a secondary light source coming through the window with the Venetian blinds. And if we added enough of these things, gradually they began to look three-dimensional. And I still have a big sort of groove swelling on my finger from all the years of pressing the pencil so hard, because the registration on these things was just set your eyes on fire. It was really, really difficult. So that's how we made it look three-dimensional. Nothing to do with layout, nothing to do with background artwork. To give you an idea of just how astonishing Roy Nesbitt's intuition was for depth, perspective, and movement through space. All these years later, when I got to meet Roy Nesbitt, when I started the research on the book about layout, about which I knew nothing, because I spent so long doing Roger Rabbit style stuff, which was always cartoons in the real world, so there were no painted backdrops. Roy told me that he'd kept all of the original sketches that he had shared, and the plans and the diagrams, with John Leatherbarrow, who was the camera operator for Roger Rabbit. And he said, would these be useful for your book? And I was like, do bears in the forest? And this is the sketch for that astonishing Succolux scene where we're supposed to believe that there is a camera following an inflated rabbit through space and tumbling and diving. And There are also shadows, there are reflections in the shiny floor, there are shadows on the work surfaces, all animated by hand. And this is explaining the BiPAC procedure. It's also a note to say, shoot the first thing the following morning and don't move the table, because if the cleaner came in and bumped the table, you'd lose the registration and you'd have to reshoot everything. You want to know what the actual painting looked like for that background? This is it. And it was so gigantic that John and Roy had to extend the compound table so it could support the artwork. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, a camera move in hand-drawn animation is not a camera move at all, because the camera can't move. The camera is literally stuck to a metal tower over a metal table, and the only movement it can make is to approach the artwork and get a little bit closer, go away from the artwork, get further away. Sometimes rotation about the center of the lens, certainly no exploration of space. So all and any exploration of space that you do see in a Tex Avery movie, in Tom and Jerry, in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, is the result of all the remembered experience of the layout artist in terms of three-dimensional geometry, space, and the knowledge and the ability to distort perspective. But I didn't know any of that stuff until much later on, because I was so busy adding shadows to rabbits. So all of this stuff tied in eventually when I began to explore the importance of layout with what I saw on television as a kid. The one time when I was working for Passion Pictures, where we did all these Roger Rabbit style TV commercials, that I ever saw hand-drawn layout artwork for a scenic element, somebody handed me a tall vertical camera move, the drawing of the tree in the jungle where the Burger King Kids Club have their treehouse, and they handed it to me and said, take this layout to Andy Knight, who was the director. And that stayed in my head. I thought, so the layout artwork is simply the background painting before the color has been added. And that was a complete match with all the things I saw on television, including Tom and Jerry. I thought, okay, so there's somebody who draws the scenic element and there's somebody else who colors it in. So the person who does the monochrome thing, that's the layout artist. That's what they do. Little did I know for a long, long time after this. So if we think about what was happening in the early 1990s, it's not that dissimilar to what was happening at the time of what is known as the Luddite Rebellion. So from 1811 to 1816, there was a violent resistance to new technologies in the textile industry. When I interviewed for the traineeship as a film editor in Scotland in 1983, I was laughed at for mentioning that I had read a magazine article in which George Lucas was discussing something called the Edit Droid, which was a digital version of film editing. And I had a bunch of Scottish filmmakers crossing their arms and going, nah, son, that's never going to happen. That's science fiction. Well, I knew that it wasn't science fiction because my father was a journalist. And this is what happened in the United Kingdom when computers met the print industry. And it ended very, very badly in violence and in conflict between unions and proprietors. And guess who won? Rupert Murdoch. So in 1986, my father came close to having a nervous breakdown because of the disruption in the newspaper and printing and publishing industries. And in Scotland, their refusal to allow new digital typesetting technologies to be incorporated into the industry destroyed a printing and publishing industry in Scotland that it had taken hundreds of years to establish ever since Caxton and Gutenberg. So my father said, when you see the technology changing in any industry that you go into, I don't care if you're a fashion designer, a photographer, an illustrator, when the change comes, you either ride the wave or the wave will go over your head. So in 1993, I joined these guys. I went and worked for Cambridge Animation Systems because I noticed that when we were doing all the compositing for our Passion Pictures TV commercials, everything after the 35mm photography was being digitized, and that's how the image manipulation was being done. So when I saw that happening in post-production, I thought eventually the wave is going to hit my department too. So for a couple of years, I traveled around the world. I was a complete idiot with computers. That's why they hired me, because they knew that all the people who would be buying the software would also be frightened little animators who didn't want to know about the digital revolution. And that was very much the case in the 90s. I was called Judas by my friends in the ink and paint department at Passion, because they're like, this technology is going to do us out of a job. It did totally the opposite. It expanded what it was possible for people to do, and it brought a flood of new people into the industry. It wasn't the disaster everybody thought it was going to be. But I spent 2-3 years going around the world training people how to use this new software. Now remember the dates. I was working for Cambridge Animation Systems in 1993 and 1994 with a new system called Animo that was there to digitize artwork, do compositing, camera work. And this little film came out in November in United States of 1995. And what happened to me? Well, after I'd worked for Cambridge Animation Systems training people how to use the software, thanks to this revolution, I went from working on a low-budget animated TV series in London to working on a multi-million-dollar animated feature film in Los Angeles. Now, I'm cutting out the Space Jam bit, so this is cheating the history because I don't have time to talk about Space Jam, but the reason I was hired on Space Jam is Space Jam was using the Animo software at Warner Brothers. So in 1996, I was at Space Jam, and in 1997, I was at Tarzan. And it was a very accelerated, very dizzying process. Now, both of these projects came from pre-existing intellectual property, and both of them were basically paid for by very big companies. In the UK, Farthingwood was done by the BBC, which is a broadcaster financed by viewer license payments. Disney started as a tiny company and it's now a powerful multinational corporation. Both of them do produce original content, but in these two cases they were working with existing IP. I never used to have an interest in any of the business, financial, legal or organizational side. I'm an artist, I just want to do my art and get paid at the end of the day. Well, if you don't pay attention, that's why they call it show business, ladies and gentlemen, because if you don't take the time to learn the business, some other person is always going to be running your show. So both of these companies paid me a weekly rate, including overtime. Disney made occasional one-off bonus payments, but I have no ongoing share of any kind in either of these projects. I receive no royalties or residual payments, even if the products continue to generate income, which they do. I only had the power to negotiate certain terms of my contract with Disney, but never with Teleimagination. And in the early 90s, I began to take an interest in that too. When I was invited to go and be artistic coordinator over at Disney, I still had in my head this really primitive idea of layout. They're the people who create the scenic elements in pencil. But when I walked into the layout department at Disney on Tarzan, I discovered, wow, these guys also do all of this. Do the character animators decide where the character is in the frame? No, they don't. Do the character animators decide on the path of action or the trajectory? No, they don't. Do the character animators decide where the camera will be or how it will travel? No, they don't. Do the character animators want the rest of the world to know that they don't do any of these clever things? No, they don't. So an enormous amount of this stuff was kind of never discussed in the behind the scenes. The documentary makers would go straight to Glenn Keane and go, how did you make Beauty and the Beast? And Glenn would go, let me tell you. And meanwhile, there were all these layout artists and scene planners going, excuse me, just a minute. So I was the guy in 2008 when I started researching the book, who, because I was invited to go into universities to help teach animation, and the universities, all they did was buy software. They had no idea how to make movies, and they had no idea that movies involved more than character animators. So there were lots of very perplexed, confused students and university managers wandering around going, we bought all this software, and I don't know, these films are just not plopping out at the other end of it. What's wrong? You know, should we speak to the software company? What's not there? And I was like, I tell you what's not there is the whole mechanical and practical process of how you put a film together, which is basically what layout is. So, oh my goodness, I could do a whole presentation on this Ken O'Connor drawing from Snow White. It's cinematography with a pencil, ladies and gentlemen. It's a guy incorporating German expressionist cinematic lighting. And there's not just one crazy mad old bitch up on the promontory. There's two of them because they've got a lightning flash and it's making a copy of her as a silhouette on the rock face, and the angle of the pencil marks is creating a curve that feels like it's pulling this rock down onto these nice cuddly little characters. It's genius, absolute genius. But a lot of people never really got to see that artwork or to understand not only how brilliant the layout department were, but the people who operated and even designed the cameras, which takes us back to our little piece of blue paper from the opening keynote presentation slide, which is the cover sheet for this extraordinary multi-plane shot from Pinocchio. So we have to wind up here, ladies and gentlemen, but we have to start way back in the sky over the Tyrolean mountains at the top of the bell tower on the school in this imaginary little Italian village. And that's going to take a lot of work because it's going to take a lot of levels of scenic artwork, a lot of arithmetic, a lot of optical diving around, and a total rebuild of one of the most expensive cameras ever created, which was the Disney 5-level multiplane camera. So we're about to watch this little sequence. I may not have time to show you all the other material in the keynote presentation, but this will really sell you on why animation layout is so important. They actually choreograph this so that they can punch a hole in one of the scenic levels and take you to an even greater level of depth on a 6th level, for which there was no supporting glass shelf on the vertical multiplane camera. And as the historian J.B. Kaufman pointed out to me, you're going to have to rewrite this whole section of the book about this sequence in Pinocchio because that's not the camera that they used to film it. And I'd already been into the archive and seen the exposure sheets that were all marked up. And I didn't know that when it said universal multiplane, they were talking about a completely different setup. So when you see this little area over the stone steps in the sequence, if it will run and not lag, you'll see that it disappears for a moment and it comes back on, and there is an even greater depth beyond it. And the way in which they had to calculate this, plan this, design everything, it's just a kind of beautiful insanity. But all these years later, 80 or more years later, it's still a piece of cinematic poetry. So I'm going to come out of this little description here in LinkedIn. This is a very heavy slide. This is the multiplane camera that they thought they were going to use. And then when they went to the greater level of depth, this is the horizontal multiplane. This comes from the Herman Schultheis book that John Canemaker wrote. And they had to shoot everything horizontally with all these different layers of scenic and cell character artwork suspended in frames that were vertical, as if it wasn't difficult enough to begin with. So what does that look like on the screen? It looks like, now I'm going to try and bring us out of this so that we don't have the same problem with the disappearing presentation in the next bit. Do I have time? I think I have time. Yeah, I'm racing ahead here. So we're going to look at that sequence. Very quickly, there is a reason why these steps are round. If this was a door that really helped an old toy maker get in and out of his workshop, it could be a door on the side of the building and the stairs could be square and nobody would care. But that's not what this door is there to do. This door is there because the layout department, like all other departments, start by reading the script. What is the thing that matters most to the central character at this moment in the story? Pinocchio wants to be a real child and go to school with everybody else. So this is a performance space that is designed so that he can come out of the door and go, who are they? Where are they going? How can I follow them? And this is what it looks like.
What are those?
Oh, look, Father, look, what are those? That's what you're doing. We have an expression in English, did this happen by accident or by design? That's what design is. It's everything that's not an accident. And that's kind of what the layout department is. It's everything that's not an accident. It's all the planning that has to happen in animation to make it possible. So talking about starting and finishing in the same place in the Renaissance, a few words in closing about those pesky Renaissance values. However we're telling our story visually, there is the abiding importance of grayscale values to make our images legible to the audience. So we have dark over light, we have light over dark, not to mention the importance of creating spaces and framing devices for the action itself to take place within the scenery and the environments that we design. And if we're doing this in monochrome as we designed to begin with, we don't jump directly into color, ladies and gentlemen. No, 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 no. We start in monochrome and we establish our light and dark values, whether we're working in CG, hand-drawn or stop motion, and when we introduce color, we remain obedient to those lighting values that we planned in our thumbnail or more elaborate lighting sketches in black and white or blue and white. So that's the end of the presentation, or it's the end of this version of the presentation. Please join me in praying for a reprint of Setting the Scene, because currently it costs a lot of money for a second-hand copy on Amazon, and that simply shouldn't be the case. Thank you, Nice Moves. Thank you, Minnesota. Thank you, Natalia, Mike, Wendy, everybody. Gracias. And I'm totally open for questions.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna clap for the masses since I'm sure they are virtually, but I'll have to stand in.
It's almost 7:20. I only ran over by 2 minutes, so
Impeccable job. And obviously, people might need a bit of time to get their questions typed out in the chat. But I just want to say, I felt incredibly lucky to have heard that presentation and to hear about so many of the things that, as you said, get glossed over in history, right? Because when you ask the character animators what they do, a lot of times it's easy for people to sort of absorb in all of the collaboration that was really occurring, right?
yeah.
And
It's like the conductor of an orchestra taking responsibility for Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It's like, well, you did stand at the front of the stage and wave your arms around, but you didn't write the music, bub. So I mean, that's a slightly unkind comparison. And I have lots of friends who are character animators and they're wonderful human beings, but they have been lionized to a quite ridiculous degree. And a lot of the older generation of layout artists that I met were really angry. They were furious at how little credit they'd been given, and they were absolutely delighted that some schmuck was going to come along and write a book about it. And I just put a microphone in front of them and just went, tell me all about it, share your pain. And they did, and it was a fantastic experience for me, because the more I learned, the lower my jaw got. And by the time I was in and out of all the archives, I'm just like, wow, this is... The only thing that surprised me was that they let me tell the story, because I was such an ignoramus, but I was an enthusiastic idiot. So, I was going in and giving them that chance.
well, I don't think any of us are surprised. I think you put together words very well. So I do have a question here.
That's very sweet of you.
Which is
Yeah, what's
that
up?
it's what are your sources of inspiration, and what's a piece of animation that you would consider required watching?
Well, there are so many pieces of animation that I think people ought to watch, even if they don't like them. It's kind of like saying you've got to go watch Citizen Kane, even if you don't like Orson Welles. But you can tell from the cover of the book. I mean, I thought that I think one of the happiest days of my life was when the Disney legal department allowed us to use an image from 101 Dalmatians on the cover of the book. There is almost nothing that you need to know or feel or understand about the original hand-drawn medium of animation that you can't find in abundance in 101 Dalmatians. The question about what inspires me, Well, the reason I moved to Mexico is, I've been here since the beginning of 2019. I've been here almost 3 years because it's the opportunity to be around for the beginning of a new industry, instead of hanging around an old industry listening to everybody bitch about how good it used to be. It's much nicer to be around people who are talking about how wonderful the future is going to be and seeing the amazing stuff that they're creating. But it doesn't matter if it's literature, it doesn't matter if it's theatre, it doesn't matter if it's music. What moves me is people who actually mean it. So in that sense, I spend most of my time here. I go out and I draw musicians performing live because there's an amazing music scene here in Guadalajara and I love to sketch. So I fill up sketchbooks with sketches of people playing jazz, mariachi, big band music, whatever. And I try and go out a couple of nights a week to do that, as Mike can tell you, because Mike came along with us when Mike and Wendy came down to Guadalajara. But here's the thing, when you're watching somebody on the stage performing music, if they are only putting their heart and soul into it when it's a full house, they don't mean it. If they're putting their heart and soul into it, even if the audience leaves and goes home, they mean it. And I think there are certain writers and performers and animators and singers and songwriters and directors who really do mean what they're doing. And I think it's down to the question about why we tell stories. And the You Are a Storyteller podcast with Brian McDonald and Jesse Bryan, which Mike also put me onto, they talk about stories as survival information. But I think it's survival and also what they discuss a lot in that podcast, which is that feeling that we're not alone. We may think that we're unusual and isolated and nobody loves us and the world's a strange place, but the storytelling world allows us to reconnect with all the universal things that remind us that we're not alone. And it's okay to be unusual, and it's okay not to fit in, all those kinds of things. So the stuff that inspires me is stuff from the heart, from the corazón, as they say in this part of the world. In any medium, not just animation.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. And also those 101 Dalmatians layouts, I have so many of the backgrounds, saved because, and especially the original pencil work is just so
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look. Okay, someone asked some more, kind of, you talked about negotiation and how you didn't have a share. Oh, look at you, you pulled up one of the best. I love that.
Walt Perigoy, color styling for 101 Dalmatians. Walt Perigoy, great guy. Yeah, sorry, Natalia, the question.
Yeah, you talked about how, in negotiating pay, you didn't get a share in any of these properties that now have longevity and continue to earn money for these companies. So what advice do you have for young animators advocating for themselves and their career today?
It's a delicate question to try and provide a realistic answer to when you're starting out, because in all honesty, when you begin, a lot of people get very snooty about this idea that I'm not going to do anything for free. Well, there's a time to be snooty about it, and at the beginning of your career, that's not the time. If there's a great opportunity for you to be involved in something, but you might not get paid to begin with, that doesn't mean that somebody's going to rip you off. To give you a good example, one of the people I know who is most successful in the stop motion industry, I was able to get her the opportunity to meet with the recruiters on Corpse Bride, and she was able to do a placement for about 4 to 6 weeks where she didn't get paid. But during that time, they realized how good she was, and she stayed on afterwards in the puppet maintenance department on full salary for that level, and she's had very few days out of work since. So there's a time to be indignant, and there's a time to basically, if you're really learning and taking stuff in, that is valuable and that is worth something. And believe me, you're not getting skinned alive in an animation company the same way you are in most universities. And please don't quote me on this because I make my living from university teaching at the moment. But if you really want to know what it is to get financially ripped off, go and sign up for one of the courses where, but being ripped off while you're learning stuff is not really being ripped off. But a lot of people get indignant too early. It's like, oh, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to compromise. If you get out of bed in the morning, you're compromising. You know, as you get older, I know there's this terrible thing about you start life as a socialist and you wind up as a capitalist and all this stuff in between. I hope I live to see the death of capitalism. I'm not a right-wing person at all. I'm very pro-union in spite of having had run-ins with different unions. But I think the most important thing is to remember you are not alone. And the beauty of working in animation is that you are working in a team. It's a visual orchestra, and there is strength in numbers. And it's like that moment in Bug's Life where they go, you know that, don't you, to the grasshoppers. It's like there's more of us than there are of you. But the main thing is people simply don't bother to take the time to find out about it. And this is what Mike and I refer to as the tripod principle. If we're only teaching people the creative skills and the technical skills, but we're not also teaching people the organizational, legal, and financial skills, it's like building cars that have a wonderful chassis, a really nice upholstery, and no wheels. It's like it's a lovely car, it's not going to go anywhere. But there's no point in trying to teach artists about payroll because they don't care. They don't want to know about payroll. So you need to make friends with people who do want to know about payroll. And you need to talk and behave as though these people also matter, also have a soul, and are not out to do the lion and the antelope thing. But the problem is that our way of training people to be entrepreneurs or managers is to put them in a different building on a different campus and say, you need to find some creative and technical people that you can exploit. And that builds this terrible toxic relationship of predatory investment and predatory production structures. And you don't have to put up with that crap. If you make friends with each leg of the tripod so that the artists are talking to the technicians are talking to the producers, and everybody's one family. But it's not being taught that way, it's not being described that way, it's not being discussed that way. So make friends with the people who have the complementary skills and don't think of them as being less than you or as being less creative than you just because they are not artists in terms of their job description. Production and production management is also very creative work. Accountancy is even more creative. And that's why, but creative in the predatory sense. So do the homework, because what's really going to stand in your favor is making arguments that are based in fact, not on just feeling annoyed that somebody else gets more money than you do or this, that, and the other. Do the homework. Find out where the money comes from, where the money goes, and how it is that certain people seem to wind up with a higher percentage of it than others. It's very well documented. You just have to buy the books and read them.
I think that was a very good, like, kind of step back at the big picture in regards to kind of, you know, sometimes the personal indignation or the struggle you might face. And I feel like this is also another good chance to remind people about the Nice Move salary survey that we talked about at the beginning of the talk.
Exactly what you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just all about crowdsourcing that knowledge and making, you know, creating a tripod together. Go ahead.
Here's another thing. Before the pandemic, it was really easy for companies in Canada and the United States to hire people here in Mexico because they're cheap labor. Mm-hmm. Well, try pulling that crap now after all the remote working, you know, because if everybody's working from home, nobody gives a shit geographically where you are. So I have a friend at the moment, this is how symmetrical this is. I came all the way from Scotland to work here in Guadalajara in Mexico. I have a friend who's currently producing for Axis Animation in Glasgow, and she lives here in Guadalajara. And she's earning the same salary that she would be earning in the United Kingdom. And there's another young graduate I know who came out of Mexico, where I'm currently employed and where I teach. And he got hired by Boulder Media to work on My Little Pony. And he was getting Dublin salary rates and paying Mexico City rental costs. So, you know, it's harder and harder for the people who are trying to get away with exploitative service industry pricing to say, you know, that's reflected also by the fact that there are companies based in Mexico that outsource the inexpensive the work to Iraq and the Philippines. So, you know, there's it all just, it goes further and further down. But the main thing is to trust and believe in the idea of the power of the knowledge and the information, and also the fact that together you can build, you can build a company of any structure that you choose. There's no rule book that says that it has to be a bunch of exploitative bastards at the top of the pyramid who are just looking out to... Nice people can run companies too. So, find nice people in nice moves who want to run nice companies and work with them. And don't deal with the bastards. Or if you're in a room or a meeting with the bastards, go in there armed with the information that they will not expect you to have, because you're an artist and you're not going to pay attention to that stuff. If you don't understand a contract, save up some money and pay for a lawyer who does. If it gets to the point of signing an agreement with anybody, never, never, never sign a document that you haven't read or that you haven't understood. And if somebody expects you, anytime somebody says to you, this is a standard contract, they're lying. There's no such thing. That's why there are numbers on the clauses, so that your legal representative can argue with their legal representative about which clauses you will include, exclude, or amend. That's what a contract is. But a lot of people get so excited that, oh, I've got a contract that's got like Nickelodeon at the top of it, so I'm sure they're nice people, I'll trust them. I'll trust Netflix, I'll trust Disney, don't trust anybody who lives and breathes and has, a heart rate. People are out to get what they can, but get legal representation and be represented by somebody who understands entertainment industry contracts. You can't be sure that every lawyer will really know what the intricacies or the ramifications are. So find somebody that really has a track record in entertainment industry contracts.
I totally agree. And I want to say that, even in our area of the Twin Cities, I have heard in regards to, taxes and just like there are accountants that have experience working with freelance motion designers, and especially in the Discord, you can like reach out and be like, hey, do you have a guy that that you like, so that there's that shared resource. I'm going to be looking through for any more questions. I mean, everyone is just responding so enthusiastically to everything you just said about financials. They love the tripod analogy. I think
it's all stuff that I've discovered by making terrible mistakes and misjudgments myself. So it's stuff that I would,
yes.
If I could time travel, I'd go back and share it with my younger self.
It actually also reminds me that when like a couple years ago, I joked that if I ever found like a great producer, I would marry them so that I could just, always have the power couple. But it seems like everyone appreciated your advice and everything you said in this talk. And I think that's it for the questions. So I think we're
Can I offer one final bit of advice to an unasked
that's what
question?
we're here for, to learn from you. So go for it.
One of the questions that often comes up is people are looking for work that's going to make them happy. They're looking, if I get a job at Pixar, it's going to make me happy. If I get the chance to move to Japan, it's going to make me happy. Very little is actually going to make any of us happy. The important thing is to take happy wherever you go. So whatever it is that you are facing as a challenge in work or whatever, bring happy to the work. Don't expect the work to take you to where happy is, because that's not where happy is. It's in here. And I think a lot of people are so disappointed and upset and annoyed and angry a lot of the time, because it's like, I was on my way to everything being perfect. Nothing is ever perfect, which is why it's important to carry happy around with you, because you need the happy to try and get through the crappy, if that makes sense. So I would never imagine that there is a career trajectory of your dreams that is waiting, that will make you happy or satisfied or fulfilled. It's a good idea to try and adopt that as a kind of attitude and mindset or lifestyle to begin with. Just try to be positive, and that will protect you from a remarkable number of different things that are out there everywhere.
Wow. I mean, I think that's a very important message, especially for a community of animators, because when you do creative work, I think there is that false promise of, oh, well, you're not doing something like accounting, so it's going to bring the happy to you. And I think, as you already mentioned, that's sort of demeaning to the accountants of the world, right? And and it doesn't address this idea of the happiness coming from within us. So that's just a beautiful thought. Oh yeah, and everyone, they're throwing heart emojis in the chat. So um, I
I
am
throw them right back at you.
all right. I'll
So
definitely.
do we get to go and be 8-bit characters now? I'm dying to be
Yes,
an 8-bit character. Okay.
yes, we do. I just put the link in the chat, and I also wanted to say that before you go, is there something that you want to plug to like our audience? Do you want to tell them about any social media of yours, anywhere else that they can support your work?
I would like to plug Latin America because I think that I knew less than zero about this part of the world because my home country didn't colonize it. Our history when I was a kid was based on all the countries that we did destroy. So because this part of the world was developed or colonized by Spain and Portugal, it was a complete blind spot to me. And when I arrived here in 2017, it blew me away. Everything, not just talking and meeting people from Mexico, but Chile, Honduras, Argentina. There's millions of, this like southern hemisphere, however you choose to describe it. How many people my age get to start over in a place that is this multifaceted and inspiring and also just hardworking? And I think that there's so much here. I would really encourage people to go out and have the courage to co-produce and co-develop. Find some people in, I've been able to connect people, young students up here with students in Norway, where I also used to teach. That's been one of the biggest excitements of my life, is seeing young Norwegian and Scottish and Mexican animators and writers and designers getting together. It's a really tiny planet. It's a really tiny, vulnerable planet. And what Cartoon Saloon and these other people have been doing with, the Monster in My Kitchen and the Greenpeace animation can reach people that find information difficult to digest in other forms. And we have a lot of stories that need to be told and a lot of information that needs to be shared because we are on a very tiny little blue dot in a very enormous dark universe. And I think that I would encourage people just to go out and make friends with people in different parts of the world, but also in your neighborhood, because I think that's one of the things that Nice Moves is so amazing for, is it's introducing people in a tiny geographical area to the fact that there is a massive cultural rainbow and spectrum of people in that tiny geographical space, and just because they don't all live on your street or in your neighborhood doesn't mean that it's not cool to connect up with them. So I would want to kind of promote that idea of put your head out the window and see who else is there instead of just getting into the comfort zone in front of the workstation.
Yes, yes, yes to all of that. Well, we are about to disconnect. So goodbye, everyone, and we will see you in the virtual space. I will put the link in the chat one more time just in case. And lovely to be all here together. Bye.
Thank you.